So here we are reading Tuckett's Ride by Gary Paulson. How fitting that I'm outside and it's windy as all get out while we read this. This is chapter 9. Francis had done some long riding in his time, hard riding and hard living, but he had never experienced anything like what these men did now. He didn't think men could stand it. Even more, he didn't think the horses could take it. They simply didn't stop. As the day wore on, Francis felt the pain diminishing to a steady throb that kept the side of his head burning. The dizziness left him, and he worked his wrists to loosen the tie there so that his blood could circulate better. In spite of her wounds, the mare kept up the pace easily. She was, like the others, a tamed wild horse and had enormous stamina. The mule kept up as well. Billy stuck at the pack saddle like a burr, but Lottie started to have troubles toward the end of the day. She weaved, and Francis could see her catch herself to keep from falling asleep and falling off the mule. In the late afternoon, they stopped, but not to rest. The men all dismounted and made Francis and the children do the same. Francis thought they would stop for the night, but he was wrong. They loosened the cinches on the horses for no more than 5 minutes, retightened them, and remounted. They can't be serious, Francis thought. They're not going to keep riding. One of the men dug into his saddlebags and handed each of the children and Francis a piece of jerky. Eat. But I'm thirsty, Lottie said, and Billy is too. The man struck her once alongside the head. Eat. She started to chew the jerky, and Billy did the same. Francis did likewise, and within moments they were riding again. At first, Francis had the strength to think while they rode. The men were running. He was sure of it. Initially, he thought they were Indians, but some of them spoke Spanish, and several spoke English fairly well, and they didn't seem to be of a tribe. Renegades, he thought. Afternoon bled into evening, and soon it grew dark and cold. The men didn't care. The leader kept the pace, riding somewhere ahead in the dark. The rest followed with Francis and the children in the middle. They came out of the mountains in the darkness and started riding across flat prairies. The stars were brilliant enough to give some light, and when a sliver of moon came up, it seemed almost daylight. All night they rode. Just before dawn, when it was coldest, the leader stopped and dismounted, and the rest of them did the same. Francis thought, surely they will stop now. Surely they will run far enough to be safe. They have run far enough to be safe. But they didn't. The men jumped around and slapped their arms against their sides to get warm. They let the children take care of their personal business, as Lottie called it, gave them another piece of jerky and a short swallow from a canteen, and retightened the cinches before remounting and setting the same crippling pace. The sun crawled up, and by this time Francis was on the edge of hallucinating. He kept seeing shadows jumping out of the edge of his vision. Billy was fast asleep, somehow maintaining his balance, and Lottie had jammed herself into the pack saddle and was sleeping as well. It was then, just before the sun was high enough to provide warmth, that Francis found out who had them. The men hardly spoke, and when they felt it necessary, they kept it low, just above a whisper. But as Francis dozed, the mare moved ahead a bit to be near two of them, and one of them said the word, Comanche. Francis' eyes snapped open, and he knew instantly who they were. Not Indians, not Comanches. These men were Comancheros. Francis had heard stories of the Comancheros down south, mostly in Texas. They were universally feared and made raids for plunder and prisoners as far as the northern edge of the Texas frontier. From what he'd heard, they were bad enough, but worse were dreaded. But worse were the dreaded Comancheros, groups of men who traded with the Comanches. It would explain how they worked the horses. At one of the trading posts, Francis had heard mountain men talking of the Comancheros and how they rode. They said a white man could drive a horse until it dropped. Then a Comanche could get the horse up and get 40 more miles out of it before it dropped again. But a Comanchero could come along, get 200 more miles out of it, then eat it when it finally collapsed. Tough men. When they had stolen stock and goods from raiding, the Comanches would meet bands of Comancheros to trade for ammunition, weapons, flour, sugar, salt, lead, and salt. Sometimes, Francis had heard, the Comanches would keep children to raise as slaves. The Comancheros had a reputation worse than the Comanches themselves. As near as Francis could figure it, he and the children were being taken by a band of them down into the south country where the Comanches roamed. Absolutely nothing good could come from it. They would be sold, he thought, or worse, separated and given to the Comanches. There was only one way open for them. They had to escape. But the Comancheros kept driving south, farther and farther away from any possible help into the country Francis did not know. With every step, escape seemed more and more impossible. If they could just stop, Francis thought, give him time to think, to rest, but the pace never let up. They ate, riding, slept riding, and kept moving somehow, keeping the horses going by force of will. All day they moved, stopping only once to loosen and retighten the cinches, to take a sip of water and a bite of jerky. All day and into the night they kept riding until Francis felt like he'd never done anything else, moving until Lottie and Billy became part of the mule and pack saddle. All through the night into the next day, and finally out in the flats of the prairie they came upon a cut, a wide canyon that didn't show until they were almost on top of it. The leader led them down a winding trail wide enough for one horse along the canyon wall. Far below, Francis could see a group of small shacks in the stand of cottonwoods, little more than brush huts covered with skins in a winding stream. It was too far away to see any people, but he could make out a faintly large herd of horses, and by squinting he finally saw small figures running back and forth. Some wagons were packed near the shacks. As they dropped down the canyon wall, Francis could hear dogs barking. It wasn't a village so much as a mobile camp, and if this trail was the only way out, it didn't leave much hope for escape. Not that it mattered so much. Francis was so tired he couldn't make his brain work to formulate a plan anyway. So tired, he had difficulty paying attention to anything but keeping his balance on the mare. She was tired as well. When they came out into the bottom of the canyon, she began to weave and wobble, and he knew she would go down soon. She somehow stayed on her feet until they were near the horse herd. Then she settled gently to the ground. Francis stepped off as she caved in, and as if she was signaling, half the other horses went down as well. The men dismounted and unsaddled, dragging gear off the horses without making them rise. Some other men, and a few women as dirty as the men who had taken them prisoner, came out and greeted them, all without talking except in low murmurs. They spoke a mixture of Indian dialect and Spanish as they helped to strip gear off the horses and drag it to the wagons. A woman came over to Lottie and pinched her cheek. Lottie kicked her, and the woman backhanded the girl, slapping her so hard that Francis heard her teeth click. "Leave me alone!" Lottie was half asleep on her feet. "Just leave me!" The woman grabbed her hand and took Billy's as well. He was standing near Lottie, his eyes closed, and dragged them into one of the huts. "Where are you taking them?" Francis started after them without thinking. One of the men stepped up in back of him and quickly, professionally, thumped Francis just under his left ear right here, with the brass butt of his rifle. Francis went down like a stone. This is one scary read. There you go. That's it for today. That was chapter 9. Back with more later. Bye.